All right, welcome everyone to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. Today, I have a very special guest, RaQuel Hopkins. She's a capacity expert, and her story is pretty wild. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it, but just last Monday on Instagram, I think she had 4,000 followers. And now, if you were to take a look at her Instagram, 150 something thousand followers, which is, I haven't seen growth that fast ever. But how are you today, RaQuel?
And well, I am happy to be here with you.
It's a pleasure
I
to
am
have
well.
you because your message, I think it's striking the right chords right now for people. People are ready to hear it.
Yeah, I'm ready to share. I've hid for far too long. I've been hiding for the last 4 years. So I'm ready to share
There's no more hiding for you now. You're in the
no, that's
spotlight
over. I
now.
think that's over.
But first, what is a capacity expert? Let's start with that.
So capacity is rooted in adult development, actually. A lot of people are not familiar with it because we talk about childhood more than we talk about being an adult. So when I was doing my program to becoming a licensed professional counselor, I felt like I needed more. And I started doing some research. Actually, I was at the doctor's office with one of my kids, and I remember looking at the milestone charts, and I was like, "Do we not have any like real milestones as adults besides buy a house, get married, have kids? The traditional markers of success." And for whatever reason, Google, I was like, there has to be a thing for adults. And it led me to this guy named Robert Keegan, and his concept is centered around capacity in the sense of who do you need to become in order to meet life's demands. So I saw the word once, and then there was another person that, a psychologist, I believe, that she likes his work, and I saw the word in her book, and then I was like, taking that word capacity because I like it, and I like it because so many people always I hear a lot of people say, I don't have the capacity, I don't have the capacity, I don't have the capacity, and I was like, this is an opportunity to be a disruptor in that space and really talk about what it means and what it looks like to have capacity, because capacity is more of a cognitive stretch.
And that's what I think. It's a word that I was trying to find that it articulates it well because when we're at different capacities, we are able to handle different things, and things that maybe used to bother us aren't going to bother us when we've done more work and we've expanded our capacity. So it's a word I was looking for. I couldn't like put a name to it, but that's the word. That's the
Now
word.
you have it.
I
Now
love
you
it.
have it. It's all yours.
No, it's still yours. It's still your word. I won't take it from you. But I think one of the most popular videos you have now on Instagram, the 3 toxic mental health trends. Could you go over what those are for us?
Yep. I think I had a bonus one in there too. That's the bonus one is the one that people didn't care too much for. Um, I'm drawn to so I the one is the over pathologizing life, right? Like I feel like even me sometimes as a therapist, I'm like, is it trauma or is it life? Because I'm having a hard time trying to decipher between what's now like normal things that we should experience as humans versus what's actually trauma. So the pathologizing. The other thing that I would say is it's the felt seen and heard, right? This need to be validated consistently, I feel like it has taken on a life of itself. And so many people don't are not rooted in like internal being able to internally validate themselves. And I think that that has really become a major issue. I don't remember what I said the first one was. What was the first one, Ju?
Labels as
Oh, the
identities.
labels. ADHD. I have anxiety so much to the point where it's like it's not I live with these things. It's like I really have become these things, and people are putting it on as if it's like clothing, and people are introducing themselves. And I maybe it's just me because I think I said that in the video. Maybe it's just me, but I thought that the labels were supposed to be a tool for understanding, not necessarily becoming like who you are as a person. And I just feel like we've gotten really we pulled away from what mental health awareness was really supposed to be about. So that's why, and I called it toxic because it's a hook, right? Well, I do long term it can end up being toxic though, like
Sure.
as a society as a whole, but I don't think it's not normal for people to do those things. I think that what makes it abnormal is that people don't have the understanding of the effects or the impact long term when you fall victim to those three things.
And you know why I think that's happening a little bit, especially with the labels as identities, is people are desperate for communities. They're
Community.
desperate for just people to be connected with. And if they think, well, oh, I have ADHD, I have CPTSD, I'm on the spectrum, or fill in the blank with whatever it is, they're trying to get something that they can feel uniquely seen, heard, and understood with. And that ties into the other one you mentioned. So, on one hand, I think it can be positive to an extent, but
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, I do think it can go too far because, like you said, it's supposed to be a tool. A tool for what? A tool to help
For
us to
understanding.
become like the best version of ourselves. It's
Yep.
the awareness. So you learn, so you have the awareness of what's going on. And what's the awareness do? Well, it helps you to really work with it and to try to maximize your capacity, to use your word.
You know what gets me though, for the people that do use it for a sense of community, for the people that really struggle with accepting these labels, they are truly isolated in the sense of I want to figure out how to work and live with whatever diagnosis that I may have. Like you spend more time in therapy with those people trying to get them to embrace that this is not who you are. So when you see a wave of people like creating community around it, I feel like it just silences the voices of those that are actually truly struggling. And I'm not saying
Mm.
that those people are not struggling because it's hard, but there are different levels of functioning as well. And I don't know. I mean, when we talk about destigmatizing, right? Like if we were to say that we were destigmatizing mental illness, it was because there's shame associated with it. So I think it's great that there's not, but there still are so many people that live with a lot of shame and are isolated. They don't feel like they are a part of a community because they understand that, they move differently throughout society. And I just saw what did I somebody just said on Instagram. I thought it was beautiful. They said that she tells her son, "You're different, but you're not less." And for people that actually carry that label, they struggle with understanding that they're not less.
And I think a key distinction is this also. So people understand what they're dealing with now, but then what do you do with it? Do you use that as an excuse to not get certain results in your life? Do you use it to excuse poor behavior? Or
Yep.
do you
To
use it
manipulate others.
right? And people do that, unfortunately. And to me, that's where it goes sideways. It's like something can be an explanation, but it shouldn't be an excuse. Like, okay, you understand, okay, maybe I did this because I have this. Well, you understand that now. Now it's your responsibility to try to do better. Like, if you know
Yep.
better, time to do better. And you're not going to do it perfectly, but
No,
you
you're not, because that's the piece about being human, right? That's whether you live with a diagnosis or not. Like I always tell people, we're all just throwing spaghetti at the wall. I mean, we are, and I'm okay with throwing spaghetti at the wall. Throw spaghetti at the wall until something sticks, and then I feel like we're constantly reinventing ourselves anyway, and that's just a part of being human.
right. So another one you had said that was, I guess, controversial was if you have to protect your peace, you don't have peace. What do you mean when you say that?
So for me, that's more of a spiritual grounding for me. Um, First, I will say that I used to be the queen of protect your peace. No new friends. I'm not introducing anything into my circle because I need to protect my peace. And what I realize is it's a form of control. because if I trust my journey and all of those things, then there's nothing to protect for me. So when I think about the peace piece, or let's use boundaries, because a lot of people are like, well, you need boundaries. You don't need boundaries. Boundaries may be the starting point for you because maybe you don't trust yourself to handle certain situations, but you don't necessarily need boundaries, not when you trust yourself. Now the peace piece, I don't know if you ever really pay attention to a person that has like a lot of boundaries and stuff. They are exhausted because, and then they say it too. They're like, my therapist said that I need to establish these boundaries and I won't get rid of these boundaries, or I have a boundary. Like, to me, it's like over explaining in a way to where you're exhausted, because what tends to happen is you start to internalize the responses that you're receiving back because no one is still listening, and now I have to cut people off. I don't know that there's any peace in that,
Mhm. I see what
because
you're saying.
peace to me is being able to navigate life with this sense of confidence and grace, and knowing that I can handle whatever life throws or tries to throw at me without going into protection mode.
And I think it's important to say, yeah, I mean, I think boundaries are needed for people, but I know what you're saying too. And I think it's an interesting way to see it that a lot of people don't see it that way. But I think it ties back into the capacity thing too. But it's
Exactly.
like, are you really trying to micromanage others in order to just avoid not getting your way? Because I think that's
Yeah,
how you articulated it in one of the videos. It's like, oh, do you have boundaries, or you really just trying to micromanage and control others because you're going to fall apart if you don't get your way? And I think it's an interesting way to see it. Where will it always be that way for people with boundaries? No, because certain people, I do think, absolutely, you're going to have to say something, or someone's going to try to trample
exactly.
you. But in other times, like, it might be more of that other version where like they're trying to micromanage, and like, I'm not saying it definitely is, but it's something to consider. It's something to consider if that's what's going on.
I agree. I agree. Yeah,
So,
I agree.
and
I
I
didn't know that
know,
I needed to add the nuances to it. I think, people, the whole concept, because boundaries are so important, I still tell people that it's a tool. It's a tool just like anything else, but at some point the tool needs to become like who you are as a person, and that's the concept of capacity. Because if every time if I met you today and you present something that makes me uncomfortable, and I have to keep reaching down to, like, pick up a tool, figure out how do I need to respond, you need to figure out who you are as a person. You need to really figure out who you are as a person. And that's why I say that boundaries cannot be a substitute for self-trust, because long term we're starting to see the impacts. This new trend of cutting parents off or cutting family members off, and this whole no contact thing. Like, a lot of people are actually hurting. A lot
true.
of people are actually hurting.
And you know what we see happen? I think what happens is when someone's gone from being a doormat and they haven't like had a good sense of self-worth, the pendulum just goes too far in the other direction for a
Yep.
little while. So they go too far, and maybe they are really quick with the ban hammer, really quick with the block, deleting, cutting off.
Oh
And
yeah.
to an extent, it's understandable. But I think as time goes on, now then the pendulum can swing back a little bit, and you've built up your capacity in the meantime. You've
Exactly.
you've developed yourself, and now all of a sudden you're like, okay, maybe I don't need to go full no contact with this person. Maybe I just need to limit the contact or something, or maybe just fill in the
Yeah.
blank, right? But it's good to consider that, I would say.
There's no pressure, there's no force to establish a boundary, because you realize that you have the ability to engage with life, that creates space for you to be flexible, to be adaptable based off of what's in front of you.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
And another thing you have said is the difference between being triggered versus being bothered.
Yeah. So again, that gets me, because we use the word trigger for everything. Even me, I have to tell myself, because I said it when my game, like, oh, but I'm not, right? And I think I'm more mindful of it because as a mental health professional, when you start to meet people that actually experience triggers, when we start to talk about like trauma, you realize that they don't have as much control over triggers, right? An old building or the smell of fire could be triggering. It's this visceral reaction to where you kind of go into like panic, like your heart starts racing, and that's a trigger to me. And I think that that's so important because again, we do have people that are living with mental illnesses and all of those things, and those voices get silent. Most of us are bothered a lot of the time by normal life challenges. And I think there's a difference between a visceral reaction because you really see a threat because you're still trying to work through your trauma and those things versus you're bothered because your boss gave you feedback and they didn't have a conversation with you about it at all, so it came to a surprise. I don't think that that's not normal. It may not be the best leadership, but it's not normal per se. Like it's not. Maybe your heart is racing because you're thinking about, am I going to lose my job? Are they trying to position me for a layoff? I mean, those things are all normal, though. I don't know that I would consider it a trigger.
Right.
So
a trigger would be something more involuntary, would you say? Like more of something that just happens because of an issue someone has, whether it's a CPTSD or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, you take the recent LA fires, right? Like, I would consider that an objective trauma. Like, no one could have expected that to happen because we know that trauma is subjective and it's based off of your perception. But I like to separate it and say you have objective trauma and then you have subjective trauma. Objective trauma is that you could put us in a group and we would all say, like, you could have never expected this to happen. We didn't see it coming. I never could have imagined. It robs people of their sense of self. You start to feel helpless. You feel hopeless. You feel incapable. That's subjective trauma to me. And those are where those triggers are usually visceral. Now, subjective trauma can cause the same thing as well, but I think it's no different from these diagnoses that we have. It's all understanding. It provides a framework. And I feel like that's what we don't have within the mental health space, like frameworks to say, okay, I'm here, but I'm also here, and I can understand why I'm here. And at some point, I can see the light again in a way to where I could possibly be over here. Now it's either you're here or you're here, like too far to the left or too far to the right.
And that's what I see all the time. It's got the black or white with it, where it's either all validation, seen, heard, understood, or the opposite, where it's like more of the toxic positivity side. And like what you also said about the being bothered and triggered, I think the big thing with it is what people do with it then. Because sometimes when people are even just bothered, what they want to do is control other people. And you see this online a lot. Someone gets bothered by a post. And I would also say if someone gets really bothered by something, like that's a sign. That's a sign to reflect on that and say, why does this bother me so much? Is there something that I have to work on? Is it something I'm insecure about or feel inadequate about? Or is there an opportunity to expand my capacity in this area? I love that term. I love that. So
glad that you like it, Jared. I wanted to say something to the last point that you just said because I often think about I say opportunities and threats, right? We have become a society that is not okay with discomfort, so much so that I think that this dysregulation that we speak about today is us not knowing how to decipher between a threat versus an opportunity. And I always tell people, like, your nervous system cannot scan for like good vibes. Like, I don't know if you're a good person or not right now, Jared. My nervous system cannot tell me that. Like, your nervous system does not control per se. Now, we would get into trauma. We could probably have different conversations, but your nervous system is always communicating. But even from a traumatic standpoint, right? If your nervous system is communicating, it's giving you an opportunity to say, hey, there's a bear in front of you right now. How do you want to respond? Or you are on social media and someone does not like how you, this post that you put out, and they just basically cursed you out. How do you want to respond? I don't know that. I mean, that bear to me is a threat because I'm probably going to go into like, because I'm afraid of all animals. So for me, I'm definitely going to freeze to the point where I become incapable of responding. Like you can have a dog in front of me, Jared, and it becomes a threat.
Oh wow.
No,
Not a dog
yes.
fan.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I'm not. I have a 2-year old and he likes dogs, and I'm like, I don't want him to be afraid, but I'm definitely terrified of dogs. But he's not, so it works. But we do have to be able to distinguish between a genuine threat versus an opportunity for growth. And whether you choose to not exercise that opportunity, that's on you. But are you really in harm's way? And I always tell people the way that you can make that decision is, are you incapable? Like, are you incapable in the sense that your back is up against the wall? And in most situations we're not. We just don't want to exercise our power because fear kicks in. I might lose my job. I might, lose a friend or whatever the case may be. And that also ties into capacity too, because there's this form of mind that we refer to. It's called the imperial mindset. And it says that it shows up in adolescence, but I think that life, and that's how my mind saw a lot of the mental health stuff that I was learning. I was like, this doesn't just apply to children. I think it applies to adults as well, because you enter a new phase. And I think that life is constantly like recycling itself. But it basically says that, we respond to life based off of rewards and consequences. When you approach that red light, do you stop because you're thinking about it's values driven? You think about like, killing someone or getting into a car accident, or do you think about like the camera that's at the top and you just don't want to get a ticket? That's the difference, and a lot of us do operate from that space.
Right. And people, I think, especially online, they get one of those something that bothers them. It's like, what has been touched upon in them? Is it really just something that now all of a sudden it's challenged a belief they have? It's challenged
Mm-hmm.
like an ego defense that they have. And so then what do? A lot of times they need the other person to agree with them to get rid of that discomfort that they have. But it's like, well,
Yep.
not always should you have to do that. Like there's going to be different opinions out there. There's going to be people that have different opinions that aren't necessarily wrong. It's just
Mm-hmm.
they see life in a different way as you.
Yep.
And
Yep. And that's hard to that's that capacity again, because I just think that the mental health conversations for me, Jared, they are very underwhelming in the sense of, for example, I believe that two things can be true. um However, I think that again, that's the beginning of your journey. My 2-year-old knows that two things can be true, in the sense, mommy, I hate you because you won't let me have candy, but mommy, I also love you. Let me have a hug. Like, we start to recognize that duality exists very early on. And that's what two things can be true. And I think that there's a difference between two things can be true and being able to hold multiple perspectives. Now, you try to get people to hold multiple perspectives, it's like, oh,
no, they don't like it. They get that unpleasant feeling, and they really need the other people to validate it. But it's like, no, like I can hear what you're saying. The best example of this was the debate I was having before we started with someone that was like, "Oh, women have all these struggles. They have these struggles, and it's different for women." But they were almost implying like, no, their struggles are worse. And in particular, we're talking about borderline stuff. But I was like, they're they're different struggles, but I don't know if you can say, oh, they're worse, they're better. It's like they're just different. They're different struggles. And okay, you feel a certain way from hearing what we had to say, but it doesn't mean someone else has to like twist, bend, and contort themselves to walk
mm,
around your triggers. Like I love something that a guy named Sam Harris said. He goes, "Your ability and capacity to be offended is not something I or anyone else needs the respect. Like if you're just offended by something, well,
That is hard. I'm not gonna, that is a hard pill to swallow because so prior to me even going viral on Instagram, I got a little moment on TikTok, and I'll share this because just because I started showing up more vocal did not mean that it was settling within here. And I tell you, the piece that was not settling was people are going to say that she's just talking to have a voice and to be a disruptor in this space. And what she's saying is unethical and she's going to harm people's mental health. The same day that I posted like what I would consider controversial, there was a therapist that jumped in and I did respond. I wasn't triggered. I mean, I was bothered, but she hit on something that I had not learned to work through yet. Like in my mind, I had worked through it enough to post it. But will you be able to navigate it if you're going to be on this space? So I'll be honest, I was going back and forth in those comments. I was like, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like,
what did
you know
she
what?
say? What did she say to you?
She was like, you're unethical. Like the state should take your license and like, and I was like, I was really arguing with her, right? And then I was like, do you trust who you are? But that was after I had engaged because I was really bothered because it was something I would say that life hadn't given me an opportunity to expand my capacity yet. So when I was faced with it, I was like, nope, not today. You're going to get off my page
Yeah.
and I'm going to let you have it. Don't let this therapist title fool you. Wrong one, right day, wrong one. Not the one, not the two.
That's hilarious. No, I mean, but that's true. I get the most bothered myself, and I can be defensive when people like they disagree with one thing that I say, and then they try to like imply like, no, well, everything you say must be wrong, and you must be unhelpful, and you must be unethical. And they want to paint you into the other complete different spectrum. Like they'll agree with 99% of what you say, but then when you say that 1% of things they disagree with, now all of a sudden you're horrible. You're horrible.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're talking about. You're hurting people. And I do get a little defensive about that because
Yeah.
to me it's not true. It's like, and it annoys me that people can't see both perspectives. And there's an
Yeah.
argument to say, well, maybe
Well,
Jared.
you're being misunderstood, right? Like that's never a good feeling. To
But
be mis
it might be an opportunity where, like you said, I need to uh, enhance my capacity for one. Or
Yeah.
like I always say, like lions don't lose sleep over the opinion of sheep. So it's like maybe if I had a perfect belief in myself, I wouldn't feel the need to defend
There
myself at
you
all.
go. Because I have
Maybe.
not heard that comment since. And maybe people are saying it because I did have a therapy friend was like someone sent her like my videos, but it was not directed towards me. So I think what's happening because it's like energy attracts energy, right? You're not going to be able to avoid anything, but I always say people can't mirror in you what's not necessarily in you. Like I
Right.
can't give you something that you don't that's just not there. I think I did a post before. I said, hurt people ain't hurting people that are not hurting. And if you pay attention to the areas where you're truly hurting in life, like someone will reflect it back to you. And then you pay attention to some of the other areas and you like, okay, I really have grown through certain situations. The thing is, life is always offering new opportunities. So it's a cycle and they all build on each other too. That's the other thing. Those lessons, they all build on each other.
Right. And you'll see, I'll ask you this in a second, but on social media, like once you get a little bigger, you get better at noticing, you're going to realize where people are going to disagree. Like, you know, the pain points, and I'm usually ready for them. But occasionally what will happen is they'll pull it into an area that I have no idea they're going to try to pull it into this area. And so that can still annoy me sometimes because it's like, this wasn't the point at all. You're pulling it into this thing that is not what I was talking about at all. And so that can bother me.
Makes sense. That's definitely understandable, Jared.
So I admit it. And like I said, yeah, I can be defensive sometimes. I can go into debate bro mode sometimes, absolutely. And it seems it feels very important sometimes to get your point out. It feels like it's very
That's the
important.
piece of being human though,
Yeah,
right? Like I don't think anything is wrong with, I think that when it becomes like a consistent pattern, right? Because even now, when I think about like my brand and my image, like I'm not trying to present myself as perfect Patty and that I have it all figured out and that none of those comments bother me sometimes. In fact, sometimes, I mean, maybe I won't do the initial TikTok response that I did to that one therapist, but some of them I do respond to, and not because I'm like angry or upset, but because I'm human. Like, to have all what I believe, to have all this good content on my page, and then you agree with 99%, and then that 1%, I'm like the worst person in the world. Like, I don't want to pretend that because I have this therapist title that I am just exempt from feeling, because I think it all matters. It's just what you over index on. Like, I'm not over index. I mean, I'm not losing any sleep behind it or anything. And it's not going to stop me from showing up. But I think that that's important, right? Like, to be able to say, I can get defensive. I understand that when you're putting yourself out on social media, it's not going to be all roses, right? That stuff I can appreciate, Jared. So continue to have your days where you get defensive, and then you're going to have your days
yeah,
where some of that stuff just rolls off your
right,
back.
right.
That's what it looks like to be a human. Like, that's what it looks
Absolutely.
like.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think, and that's the paradoxical thing. I think the more we accept it about ourselves, the better we get with it. And then it actually is a way to expand our capacity a little bit too.
Absolutely. There you go. Absolutely. 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 Because I did the video that I did today talking about labels. They were like, "Are you going to talk about like the zodiac signs?" And I was like, "Guilty." I'm not like pro zodiac signs, but I do love a Pisces. So I'm like,
That's me.
and that shows like the human aspect of it for me. Like, yeah, I say these things about labels, but then you talk to me, you tell me you're a Pisces. I'm like, really, me too. Like, I really love Pisces because we're all, but I know that that's just information. It's not like facts, but community again. But I'm not like on the other side of it. I just,
I'm March 3rd. I don't know about you.
I'm March 11th.
They're coming
See?
up. Pisces
That's
gang.
Pisces.
Yeah. My buddy
See,
Kelly.
now I feel really, really good now.
Yeah. So my friend Kelly, who I was talking to last night, she's March 2nd. I'm March 3rd. You're March 11th. Pisces is a good month. Pisces is a good
Isn't
30
it?
days.
It really is. See, now I know it. Look, now I make up a story. Now I know why we connected. I didn't think, sure, you want, sure, I'll be on, because you were a Pisces. I felt it.
There you
Felt
go.
it.
There you go. I think Pisces and Scorpios in particular, like I don't know much about the other signs, but a
Me,
lot of
all I know is a
Scorpios are
Pisces.
similar. Scorpios seem similar to me, and Pisces seem similar to me. I don't know about the others.
Really?
Yeah.
Scorpios. Is that like November?
Yeah, it's like October to November.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna look into it now.
Yeah, check it out. They got the strong personalities a lot of time. And a lot of them do. A lot of them do. And again, is it a coincidence? I don't know. But I do think a lot of Pisces are very similar in their the creative, artistic people, like some fantasy stuff. Like that's what I've seen. I've seen it.
And I would agree with you. I would agree. But I'm not like I don't walk around with it. But if
Right.
you tell me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why I like you. I totally just made that up just because you told me you were a Pisces.
I get you. Now, for you, it must be surreal considering what's happened to you in the last less than 2 weeks here, going from 4,000 to 150,000 something on Instagram. What's it like? What's it like having that happen?
I don't know yet. There's a piece of me that enjoys it, and then there's a piece of me that does not want to get so wrapped up in it either. Um, because I just know that just we as people in general, we can swing this way or this way. So um I don't know yet. I'm trying to stay as normal as possible, if that makes sense. I'll tell you what has stood out to me, especially in our political climate. Because I'm really big on, are you able to see yourself in other people? I read a comment the other day that said I would follow this woman or this lady to war. It's like, me? You would follow me to war? Like, I wouldn't have. Maybe we're talking about life, but war, you probably don't want to follow me. That's not the, but it made me think about like influence and impact, and how once people buy into you and they believe like what you're saying, you can say and do anything and you have a following. And I am now a part of that. So I think that if anything, that's the thing that has caught my attention. Like, how do you continue to use this platform with understanding that people trust you? And if people trust you, what do you do with that influence and impact? And that's something that's very important to me. I think that if anything, that feels heavy to me, that people are like, they've started labeling me like as the mental health therapist of America. And that feels, if I'm being honest, that feels a little heavy. Because I'm human. So that I think that's the piece that has caught my attention, because I talk so much about like empowering individuals and not losing your voice to professionals and experts, and to know that you are going to have a lot of people that agree with 100% of what you're saying, and that 1% that someone probably could have challenged me on, that I could have grown, like, you may lose that. So that's a hard one for me. That's a hard one for me.
Yeah, I mean, you struck a chord. You struck a chord with a lot of people that they could really identify with it. It was the right message at the right time, and it just kind of clicked. And then it is a responsibility. Like, it is a responsibility that once you get to a certain amount, like, everything you say will be under a little bit of a microscope now.
Yeah,
We,
and that's new. That's new for me. One of the things I tell, when people always ask me, like, how do you expand your capacity? I always tell people the first thing is look at your relationship with responsibility. This is a new responsibility for me. And I have not, I'm going to continue to do what I've done up until this point, but this is a new responsibility for me. And I'm going to have to learn to navigate it so that I can sleep at night.
Sure. I mean, and some of it's probably still digesting for you.
Yeah.
Like, it's happened so quickly. And I mean, people have accused me of like, Jen, you don't realize like how much your words can impact people. You don't understand. And maybe they could be right sometimes, because like when it's numbers on a screen, sometimes it just looks like numbers on a screen. Like, it's not like you're in person at a stadium or something. Oh, you went mute.
Yeah,
But
my husband just came home for lunch and he's loud to me, but I don't know if you can hear him yourself. And because I don't have I don't, I'm sure I'm probably overthinking it, but
no, you're good. It's all good. We
okay,
didn't hear
okay,
anything.
okay,
But
okay.
what I was saying was, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like it sometimes. It's not like we're going to a football stadium and there's 100,000 people there that we're talking to. Like, that feels more real than just seeing the words or the numbers 100,000 on Instagram. But it
Yep,
is it is a responsibility,
it
and
is.
it can't be taken lightly.
I really believe, and I think some of that comes from like my background in HR too, like working in HR and having to deal with so many different people and leaders. I'm like, why would you do this? Those are my real judgmental days. Like, it's like, don't you like, people are looking to you for guidance, for support. So for me, like, impact and legacy is like really important too. It's really important to me. So I'm having to I'm still sitting with it, digesting it,
Right.
as you said, but learning to navigate that space so that I don't turn into a victim, right? In the sense of this new responsibility now becomes a burden rather than a catalyst for growth or for me to expand my capacity.
Right. And that's the other thing I wanted to ask you. What are the other ways to expand your capacity? You mentioned about uh, changing your relationship with responsibility, but what are some other ways?
I I'll go back to relationships. Um And when I think of relationships, I think about like exploring your relationship with responsibility. That's one. Exploring your relationship with discomfort, uncertainty, change, because those things are inevitable, and those are usually the things that prevent us from growing and or keeping us stuck, as you were mentioning earlier. So I know a lot of us spend a lot of time looking at our relationships with self, our parents and partners, but I don't think that we spend enough time on exploring our relationship with those things, because those things are inevitable. Like, you're going to experience uncertainty, change is inevitable, discomfort is needed in order for you to go to whatever the next level is, and adulting is just full of responsibility.
Right. And you know what? You just made me think of this. But that's the biggest thing that the all validation all the time crowd misses out on, because tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's going to be much growth to be had without some uncomfortable feelings, without some discomfort. And if they're trying to avoid, oh, if they feel any discomfort, we have to shut that down. If you feel any uncomfortable feelings, we have to shut that down. Well, you're also now preventing them from growing at all, too. Like, you got to have a little bit of a happy medium. Like, okay, yeah,
You
we can
you
still
do.
validate you, but you got to feel some discomfort. You're going to
You
feel
know,
some
I like to,
uncomfortable.
when I talk about discomfort, Jerry, I like to think about it from existentialism. It talks about the four demands that we'll all face in life. And one of them is isolation, but isolation in the sense of solitude, right? Like, if you've never felt alone, and if you are resisting feeling alone, a lot of us don't end up, as when we think about self actualization, if you put yourself in that bubble, you miss out on an opportunity to grow. So if all of us are supposed to experience these moments and these times of isolation by being a part of that community that always feels like your feelings are valid and it's okay to feel this way, I think that you miss a great deal of opportunity from that standpoint. There were like, when I because I always say, when I was working towards becoming a therapist, I was looking for depth. I was looking for substance, because I never learned that just because you had this experience with your mom that this meant X. It was just informational. There are pros and cons. There are pros to growing up in a single parent household. There are pros and cons to that's not what we learned. So I don't know where a lot of the information comes from today. But the substance was in really paying attention to these models like existentialism. So if you know that your clients are going to face death, and that comes in many forms, right? If you know that your clients are going to face isolation, if you know that they're going to struggle with freedom is one. Like, that one blew my mind when I was reading about it. I was like, everybody wants freedom, but freedom is overwhelming. And that kind of ties back into that responsibility. And the other one was meaninglessness. Like, life has no inherent meaning, it's what you tend to assign to it. So when I work with clients, I pay attention to those struggles. I listen to the details and I validate, because that's important, right? But I pay attention to what are they actually navigating that's inherently common to all of us, because a lot of us get caught up in the details. The details, and I'm going to say this, and I don't say never, the details never matter. They don't. They don't. You
The
listen to them because that's the stories. Those are the stories that people have, but the details never matter. And I learned that when I became a coach, when I became certified. And that was so hard, because you want to constantly fix. And I remember they were like, nope, RaQuel, start over. And I'd be like, oh. Like, start over, because you would get caught up on the details. And in this coaching program that I went to, I learned to listen to language.
So what you mean is the details don't change like what you have to do to get better?
No, 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 they don't.
Okay, that's what I just want to clarify. That's what that was, because I agree. I agree with that. Like whether the issues, whatever the issues are, it's like you can get caught in the weeds with it, but the solutions will be the same regardless of what those in particular weeds look like. And
Yep,
this also reminds me, like you said, you made in another video. Not everyone who disagrees with someone is a narcissist. Not every bad thing that happens is trauma. Not every little thing is abuse. And I think we really have expanded, in particular with trauma and abuse, like those definitions have really expanded so that it has watered down the meanings a little bit. Like there still
hmm,
should be some sort of threshold of, yeah, I mean, is raising your voice, is that abuse nowadays? I bet you there's a lot of people who would say, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So it's like, is
And
that
I would
always
probably
abuse?
say it's human. I mean, I guess it depends on how often you're doing it. If you have no self control, and I think that that's where the complexity of a lot of stuff comes in. Like, or can we handle complexity?
That's another good one. Toxic versus complexity. What's the difference to you?
So toxicity for me is a drink. It's a draining feel, but complexity can feel draining too. But when I think of toxicity, what I think about is I've done everything that I possibly could, and nothing is changing. I'm not changing. The people around me are not changing. And for like, so when I say I've done everything that I could, I've actually changed. I'm not saying that I've inserted a boundary. That's not what I'm saying. Like, to where you can no longer even respond to, like, if you and I were in an argument and I realized that I just don't have the energy to argue with Jared in the way that I used to, because I don't feel good about who I become when I'm doing that. That's what I'm referring to. Um, and then the complexity of it is, there are no right or wrong answers per se. Like, you're gonna have to like navigate and really go through some things. It's no different from, if you're in a job, a career that you hate, right? But it pays the bills. Does that mean that it's toxic, or that you're navigating something new because life is asking you to get clear about what it is that truly fulfills you? And I think what we tend to do, and I say this because I've done it, we be like, it's toxic, and we start paying attention to everybody else around us versus starting to listen to that inner voice. So to me, that's the difference when something is like truly toxic. I think that people talk about gaslighting and all of those things. To me, that's tricky. It's tricky because, one, I don't believe in gaslighting. Two, I'm not because gaslighting, and maybe somebody can help me, but my brain doesn't register that. Jared, I just told you what I told you, and then you're trying to tell me that I said something else. Like, I just can't even understand that. And if I'm being honest, your children, I think it's normal again, like, because it goes back to, we give our power away oftentimes. My 10-year-old, I guess if we're using a gaslighting term, he gaslights me all the time. Like, did you hear me? No, I didn't hear you. I definitely know that you just heard me. Like, so, and when you put, it goes back to things being interconnected, right? When you can start seeing that everything is not about you, and when I realize that my 10-year-old can gaslight me in the same manner that my boss could gaslight me, you realize that people are being human, and you always get to choose how you respond in those scenarios. Like, that makes sense, because that's how my brain registers gaslighting. I can understand if you're trying to figure out who you are. A lot of things can feel like gaslighting, but again, rejection, feeling pain, all of those things are not normal. Life is always asking, inviting you to grow, in my mind.
So
Whether that's
the one thing I'll say, toxic versus complexity. To me, a lot of that's compatibility, right? I think people mistake incompatible with toxic a lot of times. And sometimes there is just going to be a disagreement. There is going to
Mm-hmm.
be not a meeting of the minds. And that doesn't mean it's toxic. It just means you guys are just not compatible. That's a lot of what it is. Now, where it would turn toxic to me, because I think something like with gaslighting, for example, what happens in those situations is it's more of like a process where people get
Yep.
sucked into these abusive scenarios where it's not that way at first, but slowly over time it can get like that. And then because the person like convinces them that they're always wrong, always guilty of something. And when if you're just looking at it from the outside looking in, I could see why you would think that. But it's like
Yep.
when you're in it, then for those people that are in it, it's like a lot, it's very difficult. But the solutions are kind of similar to what you just said in a way, because I just made a video about being gaslighting proof. So you had said, like, your son says some of these things. I didn't say that. And like, he's really just like, that's a manipulative thing to say, right? He's trying to
Yeah.
manipulate you. And, but what I say to people also is if someone really has gaslit you, and it's been the gaslighting process and you're really bothered by what they have said, it really worked. It's one of two things. And this is a stage 2 of healing concept, by the way. But the one is either it's touching on something you're insecure about or feeling inadequate about, or you really care what this person thinks. So, like, you've subtly given some of your power away. And people really struggle with this because, oh, they say, oh, you're blaming the victim now. You're blaming the victim. It's like, no, two things can be true at once. Like, it's not their fault. They're being treated that way. And they might need to expand their capacity a little bit, because when they expand their capacity, they'll be more gaslighting proof, is what I
Yep.
would call
Yep.
it.
Yep.
So
No, I
that's,
agree.
it's a very a nuanced discussion is what I would say about that. But that's the
It
solution.
is. But I think that that's where we need to lean in, is to those more nuanced conversations, because that's how you expand your capacity and you get to a place of being able to hold multiple perspectives. And I think that it creates more peace in your life when you're able to navigate multiple perspectives, because you're not walking around like waiting for the next person to annoy, not waiting, but everything doesn't feel like an annoyance or bothersome.
Right. And I think like how it works is for them, it just happens over time. Like it's like not right away does that happen, but it's like when someone really cares about someone, for example, or maybe it's their parent, they get sucked into it because it's like what they know. Because I mean, everyone tries to attach to their caregivers too. And if someone had some caregivers that were toxic, they become more likely to get into relationships in adulthood with people like that. And that's familiar to them now, too. Like, oh, this is what I associate love with. This is what I associate how my dad's supposed to treat my mom, and vice versa. So that familiarity they mistake for safety, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
not safety at all. It's more like it's
Mm-hmm.
just the familiar pain, the familiar uncomfortable feelings, which can be simultaneously comfortable and uncomfortable. Like it's that familiar
Yep.
pain.
No, no, you're right. I love how you're absorbing and like reciting some of the, well, you're giving me back what I'm some of the things that I'm seeing, but in your own language that kind of ties it all together.
Well,
Sounds like a person that can hold multiple perspectives, Jerry.
I try to hold multiple perspectives, and I think because I also know I know what the pushback's going to be. Like if I when I post
Mm-hmm.
some of these clips, I know what they're going to say. So I try to, because I agree with what you're saying and the solutions of it all, right? I agree with that. So
Yep.
it's just a matter of how you get them to that place. And if people go too hard on them in the beginning, they're not going to follow you to get to those places. And granted, sometimes no matter what you do, they're not going to follow you. No matter what you do, they're going to find a reason to disagree or whatever. But I try to do both for them. I try to validate them and then get them to the next spot. But
Yep.
it doesn't always work.
Doesn't always work. And that's okay too.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not our responsibility to do it for them anyway. All we can do is offer guidance. We can offer our perspectives. What people do with that is really on them. You can only lead the horse to water, as they say.
Yep. Can't make them drink.
No, no. And when people are ready for things, they're ready for things. And I think there is a little bit of truth in when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. And for a lot
I
of people, that's you right now, I think. Like,
I see. I see.
so people are ready for you, and you come on the scene hot. Boom, boom, boom. Three toxic trends to
I'm
get on.
grateful. I'm grateful because this has been it's been a long time coming. Like I felt this way for about 5 years now, if I'm being honest. I didn't have my thinking wasn't as clear as it is today. But I also had, I would say two things could be true. I was still in that space and not being able to hold multiple perspectives as it related to this topic because I was like, well, there's so much work being done around mental health awareness. So many people are now seeking therapy. Like, these are good things. People are willing to have medication. Like, how dare you come on the scenes and be disruptive to that? So I really struggled with that. And I was like, I just shut up and go and sit down somewhere. Like, don't bother these people. Like, leave the people alone. But then I started seeing more and more clients that were like, I tried this therapist, or I tried this modality, I tried this. Like, something still feels like it's missing. And the more and more that I saw that, the more that those clients were validating me to say, "Raquel, maybe you have something." So I just continue to collect data and data. I continue to read and study, and boom, we're here now, Jared.
They're ready. They're ready for this kind of message. And I think, like we talked about before we went live, I think as a black woman, you are the person. You are a good person to be sharing this message.
Well, I'm learning. I see that people are more receptive because I don't think they would want to hear it from you, Jared, because they would
No,
say that you have too much privilege and how dare you call anyone a victim.
yeah, that's.
So
I heard that
I
today.
I guess this being black works in my favor
No, it's
today.
good. It's a good thing in this, especially in this regard, because you're right. As a man, they'll say to me, "No, you don't understand women's issues. You
They'll say that too.
you definitely don't understand black people's issues." And they would be more
Hmm.
correct with that. Like, I can understand rationally, but it's different than living it. The same
Because
thing
you
as a
haven't
woman.
had the experience. You don't
Right.
know what it's like to, yeah, yeah. No, I actually had that thought a few days ago because I was paying attention to the diverse following that I have. And that makes me feel good too because this labeling thing, while I'm talking about it from a mental health place, like, I just want to be a part of the solution and not just in all areas of my life. This is not just from a mental health standpoint. Like, if I can get people to engage in very difficult conversations or get them to thinking to the point where you can start to have difficult conversations and see how we're all interconnected in ways, it will be a life well lived.
Yeah. And what I would emphasize for people when they watch your stuff is it's the things to be striving for. Because, and I think I saw someone say this in your comment section, and it's the big thing I like. It is, do you want to be right about how hard it is, or do you want to get better? Because there comes a point where it's one or the other. It's like, you want to be right about how
That's
hard.
when two things can't be true.
Right.
That's why I tell people at some point, two things can't be true because life is going to force you to choose. And in your choosing, you're going to have to hold more perspectives.
Right, because there's going to be that point where your actions are going to be looking differently if you truly
Yep.
want to be better, as opposed to just being right about how difficult something is. And some people spend a lot of time defending how difficult something is, why they're not where they want to be, why it's been so awful for them, why they're such a victim. And it's like, even if some of those things you're saying are true, what the emphasis being there is not helping you at all at a point.
Well, there's some universal truths, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are still responsible for your life. Like,
Yeah.
I think that I don't care. You can ask anybody that. with the exception of a child because they feel like they have no freedom. My parents control me and all the other things. But as adults, I think that you could pull any adult on the street and say, "Do you believe that you are responsible for your life?" I get even a victim will say yes. That's the thing.
Good.
Even a victim will say yes. I may start just going out in public and just asking random people, like you know how they do on TikTok, and just
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
questions. Hey, do you believe that you're responsible for your life? I just start doing that.
I love it. I want to see you do it. I want to see what they would
To see
say.
how many responses I get. And then I'll use that as research because people are like, where's the research and what's to the content that I'm posting? And what's crazy is I don't feel that I have to prove anything. You know what's funny? I've gotten several professors from universities reach out and say, RaQuel, we would love to provide you the research because we love what you're doing.
Awesome. I would love to see the answers to that too.
How
Because
nice is that?
that cuts right to it. That's the question. Are you responsible for your life? Yes or no?
Yes or no? I'm gonna start. I'm gonna have someone. I'm gonna go like in the mall or something and just start mic'd up and say, "Do you believe you're responsible for your
Yeah,
life?"
you definitely should. You definitely should. But RaQuel, I appreciate so much you coming on the show here. I loved your message. Where can people find you?
Instagram. My name is long. RaQuel RaQuel underscore the underscore capacity. I think if you put in RaQuel and capacity,
Yeah, it should pop
it
up.
all come together. Yeah, it all come together. Yeah. Pisces gang, Jared. No,
Amen. Amen. We're coming up. It's our time.
it is. Thank you so much, Jared, for having me today. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for coming on. You have a good one.
You as well.